Very good. Okay, now we're all right. Uh, this week's Torah portion is one of the most compact. What's the way? What word I'm looking for?
Condensed.
What?
Condensed.
That's not condensed. It's full of things, though. What? Dense.
Dense.
Oh, dense. Okay, we'll do that, and that's one way of looking at it. We begin the Torah portion. If you recall last week, Avraham Avinu, Abraham our father, whose wife his name was
Sarai or Sarah.
Sarai or Sarah. Okay. So they're still childless. He just had his circumcision, his Brit Milah. Now the rabbis are always careful to see the juxtaposition of stories. Now we don't know for a fact. It doesn't say the day after Abraham had his circumcision, he's sitting by the road. Right? But what did we read about last week's Torah portion? At the end of the Torah portion, we read about Avraham Avinu getting his Brit Milah. So the assumption of the rabbis is that since they're next to each other, it must be they followed together one after the other. Okay. Now, certainly most modern Bible scholars will say that's not necessarily the case. And indeed, sometimes the rabbis themselves said there's no strict chronological order in the Torah. A mukdam u'char b'Torah. So nonetheless, we'll accept it at face value. Okay. So Abraham, at least according to the way the story goes, and as we recognize being part of that culture, which still to this day is known for hospitality. So Avraham Avinu, Avraham our father, was known to be a very hospitable individual, inviting people to come into his tent. So now here he is. Actually, the rabbi says the third day after his circumcision, because the third day after surgery is always the worst. What does God want? God wants Abraham to rest. Take it easy. Don't go running out after strangers to bring them in. And so the Kadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, praised be He, makes it to be a very hot day. How do we know that? He says, B'chol hayom. It was the heat of the day. So Abraham sending it says, Vayir Adonai elav Elonei Mamre. The Lord appeared unto Abraham, the terebinth of Mamre, B'chom hayom, in the heat of the day. And Abraham looks up and he sees three strangers walking by the way. Okay, they're walking down the road. And Abraham says, wait. I'm sorry, let me look at that exact wording, because I'm missing the words, and sometimes I can quote the psukim, sometimes I cannot. I apologize for that. I should be able to quote this. Good old Sepharia, Tanakh. We want Genesis. What chapter is it? 24. Avram Zakein Baba Yamima and Bakol. A little later. All right, 25. Should have remembered and forgot a bunch of things tonight. But I had it by the names of the Torah portions, I would know where it was right away. I know, but yeah. See, that's the problem. As Jews, we don't know from chapters. We know from Torah portions. Okay. Now, 17 is when he gets his circumcision. All right.
How about you can play bingo?
Yeah.
Abraham's what?
That's the name of the Torah portion.
Yeah, Vayera Hashem elav Eloheinu Mamre. God appears to him, Hashem. Now, all right, we have to make a couple of things. But it opens up by saying Vayera al Elav Hashem, Yud He Vav He, the personal name of God. And where it is, and he's sitting in the opening of his tent, the heat of the day, and he lifts up his eyes, and behold, three men standing above him. It means they're off to the side. Vayar, and he saw, Vayaratz likratam, and he ran to greet them. And I'll come back in a minute. Mipetach oel vishtachu arza. He bowed from the tent opening and bows down to the earth. Vayomer, and he says, Adoni, my Lord, my master. Actually, Adonai, my master. Imatzati chen be'einecha, if I found favor in your eyes, al na tavor me'el avadecha. Don't believe me. Don't pass by your servant. Yikachna mat mayim. Let's take a little bit of water. V'rachzu ragleichem, and wash your feet. V'hishanu tachat ha'etz, and you can recline under the tree. And then I'm going to bring you some goodies to eat, a little bit of bread, and what. So like I said, this is packed. It's dense. So we have two words that are pronouncing the same way. Adonai. Yud Kei Vav Kei, the name of God, Yud He Vav He, that we don't pronounce the name. And the word my master, which is the way we usually pronounce the name of God. Big dispute. Whom is Abraham addressing? Now, if you look at it a literally straightforward, literal take of the story, he sees these three guys, and I think, as Rashi says, he addresses the one who seems to be the most important of them. My master, don't pass by me. That's the first interpretation of Rashi. That's probably what we would call the pshat, the basic, straightforward understanding of the verse. But Rashi also records there's another interpretation. And that interpretation is he's not addressing these three strangers, but God. He says, God, I know we're talking. We're having a conversation, you and I. You come, all right? But there's some people coming by. They need hospitality. Would you wait for me a few minutes while I take care of these guys? Is it chutzpah, or is it, or is he the mitzvah of hachnasat orchim, of bringing in guests, strangers? So how do we can't really resolve it, but I will tell you something. In the Masoretic text, the version of the Bible that is the official Jewish version that we use today, the word Adonai, my Lord, can have a patach or a kamatz. The patach, just a straight vowel, is said by the traditional interpretation to mean an ordinary usage of the word, my master, Adoni. Today we say Adoni. When it has a kamatz, it means God, is referring to God. So when you look in the text with the Masoretic voweling that we use, it has a kamatz under it, saying he's speaking to God. Later on, when Lot also refers to strangers as my master, it's with a patach, meaning it's chol. In the some Masoretic texts, one's kadosh, one's holy, one's chol, one is profane. So Abraham sees these strangers clearly by rabbinic tradition and in the tradition of the Torah itself. These are angels. What's an angel?
Messenger.
A messenger, exactly. Because when Abraham sees them, he doesn't see these individuals with long white robes and things on top of their head and big wings on the backs. He sees three people. Throughout the Bible, when we're talking a malach, an angel of God, invariably you will see that they look like people. They don't look any different from people. And Abraham makes a mistake and thinks they're just people. Later on in the story of the announcement of the birth of Samson, when an angel appears to Samson's mother out in the field, She thinks he's a man. He looks great. He's a great looking guy. But Brad Pitt, according to some, is a great looking guy, but he's not an angel on any definition of that. Okay, that's not fair to me. Or to Brad Pitt. I don't know the guy any. No, right. But she thinks he's a man. When her husband later on greets with them, we'll see that when we look at the story. They think they're people. When Lot brings them into his house a little bit later on in the Torah portion, he thinks they're people. When the people of Sodom want to do violence to these strangers, they think they're people. Okay? So we have to understand that when one sees a malach, one does not necessarily see something that looks different from another human being. Furthermore, frequently, we will find that the Bible is not always careful, and it moves back and forth sometimes between God and the angel, the messenger of God. The burning bush, it's an angel, it's God speaking to him, it's back and forth. Since he's the messenger, may be seen as in lieu of God, but that's the reality that's there. Okay? So getting back to the midrashic treatment of it, okay, so God wants to make it a good day for Abraham, so he'll rest in the tents and makes it so hot. It makes it hot, people aren't going to be coming by. And what happens? Abraham's sad. There's nobody here for me to bring in. So God decides to appear to him as in the form of these three angels so he can feel better about bringing in guests. Right. So as the story continues, they tell Abraham that his wife Sarah is going to have a child, and she laughs at it. Me, I'm 90 years old, and my husband, he's 100. You think he can, or 99 at this point, I guess. You really think he can, he's beyond that. I'm beyond that. God says, don't worry. This time next year, you will be with child. And that's one of the explanations why his name is Yitzchak. Yitzchak tzachak li. They will laugh at me and make jokes about me. And so, indeed, they laugh with her, as later on, enjoys this when she gives birth at the age of 90. So then, next stage of the story, to some of the major points, God says, can I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? And he says to Abraham, look, the cries of the evil of Sodom and Amorah, Sodom and Gomorrah have come to me, and they've had it. Okay? And what does Abraham do?
Praise.
No, he doesn't pray.
Oh, he's off.
He argues with God. Wait a minute. Can the God not do? Are you going to kill all the righteous with the evil? That's not your way, God. You don't do those kinds of things. If there are 50 righteous in the city, will you spare the city for the 50 righteous? And God says, okay. All right. Have it your way. God, if I can bother you a little bit more, what if it's 40? All right, you'll have what you got. You're 40. Okay, 40. What if it's only 30? 20? He finally gives up at 10. Now, in many ways of interpret, don't forget Avram's nephew Lot lives there. But when I gave my senior sermon, the year you graduate from the seminary, you give a sermon on a Shabbat. This was my Shabbat to give the sermon. So I was suggesting Avram was trying to save the wicked, not the innocent, because he knows the innocent God could save. He was really trying to save all the people if he could. That was my assessment. Be that as it may. So the three angels now become two because one has healed Avraham. He's taking care of his job. Rabbis say the angels only have one job. So the heal Avraham and tell him you're going to have a child, that was the job of one angel. So the two angels come to Sodom. Lot invites them in. And the people in Sodom want to do harm of some kind to these two strangers. It looks like they want to sodomize them, hence the name Sodom. Anyway, and Lot, because they're under the roof of his house, you can't do that. I have 2 young daughters who've never known a man. Take them instead. Where his head is, I don't know. But fortunately, the angels say, don't worry about it. They strike blind the people outside the door, and they say, look, you got to get out of here. God's going to destroy the land. And so it takes his wife and his 2 daughters, and they flee. And, the story goes, at one point, the wife looks back. She's supposed to return to pillar of salt. And they hide up in the mountains. And then they think the whole world has come to an end. And you'll read the story. I'll skip over that part. And then we have the birth of Isaac and the celebration, and problems again with Yishmael. And Hagar and Ishmael get expelled from the camp of Avraham. And we'll come back to that in a few minutes. And then we come to the climactic moment of this week's Torah portion, which is called Akedat Yitzchak, the binding of Isaac. God says, Avraham, and Avraham says, Hineni, here I am. Kachnad bincha yechidcha asher ahavta et Yitzchak. Take your son, your only son, the one whom you love, Isaac, and offer him up on a mountain I shall show you. And Avraham is silent. The Midrash puts in all kinds of things. It says, God says, take now your son. But God, I have 2 sons, Ishmael and Isaac. Your only son, but each one of them is the only child of their mother, whom you love. I love both of them. Only finally at the end does they say Yitzchak, Isaac. But really, the Torah, this is what if you look at the story with Sodom and Amorah, Sodom and Gomorrah, Abraham fights with God, challenges God. Comes to the story with Isaac, he doesn't challenge. And believe me, the amount of ink that has been spilled trying to explain all of that would more than wash away this entire city in a mammoth flood. Okay. But in any case, he gets up early in the morning, and some wisely point out, if you get up early in the morning, your wife's still sleeping, she doesn't know what you're doing, and you can sneak out of town. All right. And then he goes, and he's walking with his son Isaac and 2 servants, and they tell the servants to stay with the animal. And Isaac's carrying the load of wood up onto the mountain, and Isaac says, she's got the fire or the fire starter and the knife. Where's the lamb for the slaughter? And Abraham says, God will provide. B'ni, my son. So depending how you can word it, God will provide my son. So he's telling Isaac. There's a big argument. How old is Isaac at this time? There are no clear indications of how old he is. We know when he's born, we know when he dies. We do not know how old he is at the time of the story of the Akedah. Rashi famously builds on a very, I think, weak foundation, but who am I to criticize Rashi? At the end of the Torah portion, we're told about the birth of Rebekah. And then we're told not long after that Sarah dies. Is a rabbinic drash, and believe me, it's a little difficult also, that Rebekah was only 3 years old when she marries Yitzchak. And so since we know that Sarah dies right after the binding of Isaac, and we know that Rivka was born around that time, because we're told she's born. Not that it has to be, it's just a report comes to Avraham, but that's how they read it. So deducing that when Sarah dies, and how old Yitzchak was, and she was born at 90, she dies at 127, excuse me. That means Isaac was 37 years of age at the time of the binding of Isaac. That's Rashi's interpretation. Ibn Ezra, who likes to take a different tact often, says, well, he's old enough to be able to carry the load of wood. So it must be 13, 14 years of age. Take whichever interpretation you prefer. But in either case, Isaac, according to the reading where Abraham implies that it's going to be Isaac who's going to be slaughtered on the altar, he doesn't protest. He doesn't fight it. And Abraham's willing to sacrifice Isaac until the last moment that an angel says out, Abraham, don't touch him. Okay? And it ends there. Then Abraham goes back to where he was coming from. It doesn't say it goes back to where Sarah is. We don't know. Isaac's not mentioned. The Torah is silent about Isaac right after that event, until after the death of Sarah. So you can drive a big truck of interpretations into what that absence means, what have you. But during the Middle Ages, when Jews were confronted by crowds in Europe, medieval Europe, to convert to Christianity, they would often choose death over conversion. They were even willing, and we know a number of episodes where they committed mass suicide, killing their children and their wives and themselves, the men, rather than surrender to the mob. And they saw this as a reflection or an emulation of the story of the binding of Isaac. And so that's just the major highlights of this week's Torah portion. But it contains within it two ideas that I want to talk with you about for a few minutes. We have some kind of issue that pops up, which Sarah doesn't want Isaac around Ishmael. Again, we're not told. The rabbis fill in the gaps. Ishmael has to be a bad guy, otherwise, why that? Let's just take it straight forward. Perhaps there's just jealousy between Sarah and Hagar, which we did see earlier. And Ishmael gets cast out of the camp. And there's a separation. And rabbinic tradition and Islamic tradition see Ishmael as the progenitor of the Arab world. And so indeed in the Quran, it's Ishmael who is almost slaughtered on the altar, not Isaac. Right? And we have this divide. Ishmael helps bury his father Abraham later on, so there's not it's better than what it first looks like. But we have that enmity. And when we talk about the state of Israel, the creation of Israel and Zionism, we'll go into more depth on it. But right now we're seeing a reflection of that. I've been hesitant to talk about it with you, and although I talked with my colleagues today, and he said, no, we should really talk about it a little bit, what's been going on in Israel the last few weeks. Because it says in the Talmud, when somebody asks to convert to Judaism, you're supposed to tell them how bad things are for the Jews, and, do you really want to throw your lot in with these people? And, up until, maybe right after the Second World War, but you might have felt like that. But, after the Six-Day War, and even with some of the issues that have come up, I wouldn't exactly have said, if you asked me a month ago, how do the Jews of Toronto feel about living in Toronto and being part of the Canadian community? They're fine with it. It's a nice country. It gets a little cold in the winter. It's not like my home in Florida, but all right, I'll live with it. I like snow. I got to, get deprived childhood. But people are genuinely scared today living here in Toronto. This rabbi who was talking to today, I can't quote it exactly, but his former congregant, he's retired now, was a doctor in Mississauga, and he shares a name with somebody else, the same name. And so they may have got them confused, but somebody left a message on the phone saying, we let you in after the Nazis, and look what you're doing now. You're killing the Palestinians. We're going to kill you and your family, and you fucking Jews. You look at what goes on, what's been going on, not in Israel, but in Europe. And it's not just the statements that are being made. You don't have to be an anti-Semite to feel that the Palestinians have gotten a raw deal. I feel that in some ways. I don't know what the answer is, but I know they haven't had the best of treatment necessarily. But that does not excuse what took place on Simchat Torah. Actually, Shmini Atzeret for us in Israel was Simchat Torah. Not only the killing, but the barbarity. And then what makes it worse for a Jew is that not that we hear there are people who support the Palestinian position. It's people who say, it's okay. What they did was all right. Mm-hmm. It's your fault. If you'd been nicer to them, they wouldn't have done this. All right? Now, some of you here, you've got it, you're stuck with it right now. Some of you, or most of you, have made the very crazy possibility that you might step into that. To become a Jew is to become, in the eyes of some people in this world, a pariah. And right now we're seeing it more than ever. No, pardon me, but you gentlemen, both being black, you're going to have it even worse. Right? Oh, you can't be Jewish, you're a black. You mean you turn against other people of your own race and join with those white Jews? You're going to get from both sides.
Yeah, but they're also hidden at the same time, because a lot of people don't know that there are other cultures of Jews.
Well, the point I'm making though is you can hide. People can hide. Most of us don't walk around town with a sign on our chest saying I'm Jewish. Because that's what the Nazis did, the yellow star. Right. And many people in this room, I take a look around at the various complexions and shapes and sizes and everything like that. And, funny, you don't look Jewish, whatever that means. But if you go through this whole process, are you really prepared for that? What do you feel what are you feeling right now about Israel and what's happening? Anybody want to volunteer a response? Yeah.
Anger.
Anger.
I mean, I've lived in the Middle East. I've been to the Middle East a couple of times, but I haven't been there as a warrior, as a military person. It was infuriating to me. And I haven't, like I said, it's been kind of stressful because I'm always thinking that, I might have to suit up and be ready for another conflict again. There's something that's part of my training, that's what I was trained to do, and having to make sure that I didn't have to explain to anybody's parents why their son or daughter didn't make it.
Hmm.
So that's kind of like the thing that I've been wrestling with for the last 3 weeks.
I'm feeling scared and a little intimidated. My husband told me, please don't tell you're going to admit to you that it's in court, please. Don't talk about this. Keep it to yourself. Yes, now is the time to be cautious. It's scary right now.
Anybody here have family in Israel?
Yes.
We do.
Right now, fortunately, one part of the family is Haredi, so they're not going to be serving in the army, and the others that are in the army are doing work somewhere else. Thank goodness, not going into Gaza. But the missiles, when they rain down, don't care what you look like or where you are if you're in the wrong place. So that's, I just want to put that onto your plate. If I can't scare you away from all the tests and everything I'm going to be giving you. But seriously, this is it is it is now an existential question, much more so than it was a month ago. It's been building up. It's not safe for somebody to walk around in a lot of parts of Europe wearing a yarmulke, a kippah. A lot of men who don't necessarily dress the part, but will walk around with a yarmulke, so they just wear a hat, a baseball cap. Everybody wears baseball caps. All right. All right. So think about it, and yeah, that's where it is.
Oh, so here's a funny story that's not so funny. My cousin, when she was little, she used to they used to have to wear, like, bring your gas mask with you to school, right? To public school when they were little, and high school and stuff, right? That was just routine. And if you forgot your mask, you'd be sent home for the day. So she forgot her mask and had to go home so she got sent home from school for the day.
And was that
Got it.
intentional?
Right?
The missile attack part is what gets me though. Man, I've actually been through one, a couple actually.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah, she's great.
kinda
She's
scary.
lovely. She lives in
Yeah.
the States now, but we still have most of our family over there, and she's always back and forth with
Yeah.
their kids and everything.
I have a friend in combat right now. So when I knew that I was living in the States, he's now he got recalled to active duty.
There's some guy who from New York went back to Israel and was killed just a few days later. All right. So when one has a Jewish child, one has to remember the binding of Isaac, because when you bring a Jewish child into the world, you are sentencing them to be the possibility of that sort of thing happening. Right? I want to. I don't think we're going to do the Hebrew tonight because there are some things I wanted to touch on from the Siddur. There's and then about Tallit and Tefillin and Mezuzzah and all of that. I will send you a paper that I wrote not long ago with an analysis of the 18 benedictions, 18 blessings. All right? But we talked about the Shema last week. The Amidah, as I've said a number of times, you have 3 blessings at the very beginning, 3 blessings at the end that are always the same, with maybe some additions added to them for the Yomim, for the high holy days, Yomim Noraim. But on Shabbat or on a holiday, we don't recite the normal 7 other blessings, the middle blessings, the 13, but instead we have a special blessing for the day. All right? For Shabbat or for Yom Tov, whichever the case may be. But the formula of the Amidah that we say on a weekday really speaks of the things that we need in life. And some see a very clear structure of the relationship of each blessing with the next. So the first thing we after the opening three blessings, we say, Atah chonein l'adam da'at. You grant knowledge, understanding to a human being. And we praise God, the bestower of understanding, of knowledge, dot. Because before you can do anything else, you've got to have understanding of the world around you. Then we ask God to help return us, bring us back to Torah if we've lost our way. Because for Judaism, Torah is the center of our life. The Torah and its mitzvot. Then we ask God to forgive us for any kinds of sins, trespasses that we may have done. And then we ask God to help us, to save us, redeem us from threats that we may face in the world. Then we ask God to heal us from any kind of matter that harms us in any way. And we praise God, Rofei Cholei Amo Yisrael, it heals the people of Israel. In many prayer books, Sidurim, they will tell you that in the middle of this blessing of healing, you can add prayers for healing for someone whom you want to pray for. If you have somebody who's sick, ideal time is in the middle of this prayer, which is a general cry for healing, to ask God to heal that individual. And it matters not if they're Jewish or not Jewish. Okay? No, it's not the Mishaberach. That's something else in the Torah. This is in the middle of the Amidah. And I'll explain. And in my paper, I explain why. Never mind. I'll send it to you and do with it as you want. All right. Then we ask God to bless the year, make it fruitful and satisfy us from the world. Then the sound, the shofar, the great shofar for our freedom, restoring us to all the dispersed of Israel, which is a pre-Zionistic, Zionistic concept. The idea that ultimately the Jews are to be together in Eretz Yisrael. Then we ask God to restore our judges as of old, a legal system based upon righteousness and justice and mercy, and would be bestowed upon us. Then we have a blessing, which I'll come back to in a minute. It reads right now, La malshanim al tikva, for those who slander us, may there be no hope. V'chol arisha kerega toved, and my weakness may it disappear in a moment. V'chol oivecha mehera yikaretu, and may all of your enemies in an instant be cut off. V'hazedim, and those who are arrogant, mehera ta'aker shaber, a number of wording meaning to destroy. And we praise God who brings down the wicked and the arrogant. Now, this prayer, according to the Talmud, there originally were, at least in the Talmud Bavli, there were 18 benedictions. And at some stage of history, this was added. And there's some debate, but it seems clearly the reason it was added was because this was during the time when Christianity was being born. And early Christians went to the synagogue. And the idea behind it was if you that you would chase away those who didn't fit the bill, the heretics. And indeed, the original wording was those who turn away. Meshumat is somebody crosses out of the faith. And it was about the Malchut Zadon, the wicked kingdom, which was probably in reference to Rome, the Roman authorities, especially once Rome became identified with Christianity. The rabbis of the first few centuries grew up in a world in which Rome was the power. And so Rome was always deemed a threat. And Rome had a special animosity towards the Jews at a certain stage of the history of Rome because of the revolt of 70 and 132, which, you know, the Romans didn't like people revolting against them. And it was a bit of a struggle that the Romans had to have. They even put up a fancy arch, the Arch of Titus, in the middle of the city of Rome. You can still see it today. And then later on, when the church and state became together, when Rome became officially Christian, it becomes identified in the Jewish mind with Christianity as well. And there was there's a history of persecution that lies behind it. And it's worded this way today because it was censored. And you can find some handwritten prayer books in some museums where the original words are blacked out, so the Jews wouldn't say them. And the church censored parts of the Talmud as well for that very reason. Sometimes because they had people who had been Jewish who claimed that these were anti-Christian things in the Talmud. Mm-hmm. And you will find every once, if you like to surf the anti-Semitic websites, you will find some of these things on those websites till today. So after we ask God to get rid of the wicked, the evil, we now ask his prayers for the righteous and the pious, and grants a rich reward to all those who trust in your name and truth. And the Gerei Tzedek is also mentioned in here, that those people who throw their lot in with the Jewish people. Then we ask for Jerusalem to be rebuilt. We ask for the restoration of the Davidic line. We have then kind of like a catch-all. If we didn't say something before, Shema Kolenu, hear our voice and answer our prayers, as kind of a catch-all at the end of those middle blessings. So they all serve as a way of organizing what the rabbis thought we should look for in the world. Furthermore, they serve as a kind of catechism, if you don't mind the word, to the person who prays and understands what they're praying about, to what they should value. You know, prayers can go two ways. You can pray because this is what you feel, or you take the words of prayer and put them into your own heart. Maimonides says that originally prayer was not a set prayer. People came up with their own following a certain outline, but not everybody was capable of that. And so then we had the structured prayer that we have now. And so we say the prayers sometimes because we believe them, sometimes because they challenge us in different ways. Sometimes we may be challenging God. After all, Abraham did it. Why can't we? You made a promise, God. Why don't you live up to it? There's a story about God being put on trial after the Holocaust and being found guilty. And then everybody went to pray. So that's the Amidah. I like it on Shabbat. Yom Tov, it's a prayer for the day. In Musaf time, it's a restoration of the Musaf service of the ancient temple. All right, besides words, there are other ways that we pray. First of all, how we pray, what standing, sitting, are indicative of, in many ways, of what we're doing. We see traditionally, when a prayer had greater import, it was said standing. And there's a famous argument in the Tallit. How do you say the Shema at nighttime, and how do you say the Shema in the daytime? Because it says in the wording of the, you say these words, you lie down when you rise up. So lying down is the time we say the Shema, but Beit Shammai says that means we should lie down to say the Shema. And when you rise up in the morning is saying when you say it, but Beit Shammai said, no, you're supposed to say it standing. And that's why, for example, in a lot of Reformed congregations, they stand for the Shema, both nighttime and morning. But we today, there's tradition is, the accepted tradition is, if you're standing when you come to the Shema, you can stay standing. If you're seated, you should stay seated. Better, you should be seated for the Shema's at all times. Mm-hmm. Furthermore, we want to concentrate on the Shema. So there's a tradition that we recite the words of the Shema, we take our right hand and we cover our eyes so that we can concentrate on nothing but the words that we are saying. Now, there's also a custom, and we'll talk about tzitzit in a little bit, that men take the fringes of their talit, or the women if they wear a talit, and kiss them. When we mentioned the mitzvah in the last paragraph of the Shema about the mitzvah of tzitzit. All right, that's the standard tradition. So those are something. Then, if the Amidah is supposed to be our standing in the presence of God, that's the Sephardic name for the prayer, the Amidah, right? The Shemona Esrei, the 18 benedictions. So when we recite the Amidah, you guys, I apologize, I don't have the right camera here. So traditionally, we're going to approach the throne of God. We make it into a kind of dance, if you would. So before I got to have room to approach. So traditionally, we take 3 steps back. Start when you're going back, you start with your left foot. When you go forward, you start with your right foot. Okay. So then you take 1, 2, and the 3rd step together. Here are your 3 steps. And then when we start the first blessing, we bow, Baruch Atah Hashem. And at the end of that first paragraph, we again, Baruch Atah Hashem. Towards the end of the Amidah, when we come to the prayer that's called Modim, which we recite all the time, there's a difference of opinion on exactly how you're supposed to do it. I follow what I learned early on, the same kind of bowing. Others just say you don't bend the knee, you just bow down. Modim anachnu lach. But at the end of that blessing, there where it says Baruch Atah Hashem, you stand up. When you finish with the Amidah, you take 3 steps back, and you're supposed to recite the words Oseh Shalom Bimromav, Hu Yaseh Shalom Aleinu, V'al Kol Yisrael V'imru Ameh. He who makes pleasant peace in the heaven, Oseh Shalom Bimromav, who makes peace in the heavens above. Oseh Shalom Aleinu, V'al Kol Yisrael, make peace on us and all of Israel. So that is the standard tradition. If the back and forth is what's done. Now, your position during the prayer, the traditional idea was you keep your feet together, like the angels. Because the description makes it sound like angels don't have feet, but they just have I don't know exactly how that works out, but anyway, their legs are together. But you will see many different ways of praying. There are some who stand very rigid, except when they're bowing down. And then you'll see some who bounce around. Right? Because the whole body gets involved in the act of prayer. Neither one is right or wrong. It's how you feel it, what you learn. And you'll see kids emulate what they're taught. So you'll see kids whose parents, what they call shuckling, shuckle, they will tend to shuckle. And they even do that when they give a speech, a bar mitzvah speech. Today I am a fountain pen. That's an old joke. All right. And then also, when we do the repetition of the Amidah, there's a tradition when we come to Kadosh, 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 we just stand, lift ourselves up like the angels. Kadosh, 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 holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. To do that in a number of other places on that sort of thing. Whenever the Ark, Yaron HaKodesh, is opened, we stand. Technically, you don't have to, but that's become the accepted tradition. And certainly you have to stand when the Torah is being moved around. So that's basically what you might call the choreography of the prayer. Bowing, if I remember, also I have a sheet that I did once upon a time for my synagogue about with the choreography of the prayer, but it's all based on their style. We'll see if I can send it out or not. All right. Also, ideally, you're in the synagogue to pray. You're not in the synagogue to discuss the stock market, the hockey game, and all the other things that you, when you look around in most synagogues, you'll find people doing. There's even a Misha Beirach, we mentioned, talking about, for those who don't talk in the synagogue. A rabbi composed a special prayer. Now, that's one of the things that someone coming from the non-Jewish world cannot comprehend. When in the more traditional the synagogue, the less decorum will be found, which is wrong. Actually, it's wrong, but that's the reality. Jews feel at home in the synagogue. They don't feel like there's a place that's not for them to be. And so they feel comfortable in that space. And since people don't always pray at the same rate, some are faster, some are slower, some like to say the prayers more out loud, others like to keep it mumbled. So you'll have all of that. As you get more towards the more liberal realm of the Jewish world, it becomes more church-like, for better or for worse, however you want to look at it. And many an Orthodox rabbi is always fighting with his congregation to shut up. They don't usually say shut up, but we're reading the Torah, I can't hear it. Please, quiet. You need to talk, go out in the hall and talk. But those are all factors that go into it. And especially the idea that people often pray at their own rate. And you go to, especially very traditional synagogues, you will see that people aren't always on the same page. Because prayer is supposed to be very personal. It's not, but it's a balancing act. It's a balancing act that we live with between when I go to synagogue, everybody else is gone. I'm not, I've been known to say a word or two to somebody. Otherwise, I don't go to the main minyan at the synagogue that I attend because there's too much talking. I go to a service downstairs in the Beit Midrash where there's almost no talking. that suits me fine. When my son is with me and we're in the shul together, all right, he's there, I'm there, that's it. So what? I'll speak to him after shul, I'll speak to him before shul, but during shul, we don't speak. So those are, that's the reality of the synagogue in terms of that. There's also a certain kind of reality of uniform for prayer. Now, the Torah speaks of different things that we are supposed to do, and they've been and it's understood by rabbinic tradition to refer to two items of garb that we wear in the synagogue. The first is the Tallit. Now, the last paragraph says, make tzitzit, ritual fringes, on the corners of their garments throughout the generations. The rabbis understood that to mean if you wear a garment that has at least 4 corners, there's a requirement to put tzitzit on it. If you don't wear a garment that has 4 corners on it, there's no requirement to put tzitzit on it. Right? I mean, I've got a shirt on, right? I do have 2 corners in the front, but there's, in the back, there's no corner, right? It's my ostomy. So I don't wear tzitzit on it. I can't fulfill the mitzvah of tzitzit on a garment that has 3 corners. But, how can I not fulfill the mitzvah? So it became a practice because around the turn of the first millennium, the beginning of the first millennium, people wore what is referred to in the Talmud as the Tallit. Now, the Tallit of the Talmud doesn't mean a prayer shawl. The Tallit of the Talmud means your coat. And what was the simplest way to make a coat? It's basically a blanket. And so, if I want to go out and it's raining, I can cover my head and keep the rain off my head. If it's cold, I can wrap myself up and keep myself warm. If I don't have a blanket, I lie down and I have my blanket. That's all it originally was. But if you wore it as a garment, now, and it's got corners, now it has a requirement for fringes. And so at an early stage, it became the accepted practice for men to find a way to have a garment that they could wear at least during prayer with 4 corners. And it became known as the Tallit. Now, it's understood by the rabbinic tradition, it's got to be a garment big enough to cover you, at least big enough to cover a youngster, a young child. So you go out in the marketplace, is the way it's worded. So most of the, until relatively recently, most of the talitot, is strange, in correct Hebrew is talitot, in Yiddish version is talesim. I have no idea why that works that way. But the talit was different sizes, but big enough to cover your back and at least go down a little bit. And generally speaking, it would be worn like this, with 2 tzitzit in front and 2 tzitzit in the back. And when you came to the Shema, you would gather them all together in the front and hold them for the recitation of the last paragraph of the Shema. Now, some do wear a smaller talit, which is really a prayer shawl. This is something not much bigger than a shawl, but it should be big enough to cover your back if you have that kind of a tallit. And it should not really be worn just draped around your neck. If you have a smaller tallit like this size, at least it should be worn like this. Okay, so it's covering your back, not like this. Although that's what you will see a lot of people doing. Okay? Now, another thing that's done, you won't see it as much in conservative circles, but to wear tzitzit all the time. And so in order to do that, you'll have a garment that has a hole in the top, a rectangular piece of cloth with corners that you can attach the tzitzit to. That's what I do, my sons do. The tallit traditionally is worn every day, right? Sunday through Shabbos. The only time we don't put a tallit on in the morning is on Tisha B'Av. That's at the end of the last term. Okay. There is a tradition in Eastern Europe, which I don't think is a really good one, but there's a tradition that develops out of Eastern Europe that when one became bar mitzvah, celebrated the coming of age as a bar mitzvah, they could do things in the synagogue, and certain other things in the synagogue required wearing a tallit. But if they weren't doing those, they didn't wear a tallit until they got married. Maybe the basic idea was there was a way to let people know who's available. I don't know. There wasn't. Now, also, the rabbi said the wording of that paragraph of the Shema is "Ritem otam," you shall see them. It was mitzvot Hashem, and you remember the mitzvot of the Lord your God. First, the midrashic play on that. If you see them, they're supposed to serve as reminders of the mitzvot. Traditionally, how many mitzvot are there?
613.
There's 613. The word tzitzit, if you take the numerical value of tzitzit, you get 600. There are 4 strings, but they're doubled over, giving you 8 strings. We're now up to 608, and there are 5 sets of knots, giving you 613. So if you have the tzitzit and you look at the tzitzit, they come up with the 613 as a reminder of the mitzvot. Also, it says in that paragraph in the Shema, "Upetil techelet." You should have a petil techelet, a thread of techelet. Techelet was a purple bluish dye, and it went out of production at some stage of history. And in recent years, there has been an attempt to reestablish what that methodology was, how a certain snail was used to create the dye. And so some today have started back with the blue fringes on there. But most talitot do not have it on there. And now also it says, "Ritemota," you shall see them. Now, we have nice electric lights in here, and so we can see the tzitzit. But if we walked outside in the dark, you couldn't see them. So the rabbis understood that means it's a mitzvah that is only has to be performed during the day and not at night. And now we get into some of the touchy areas. Since it's a mitzvah that is time dependent, mitzvah shezman grama, women are patur. Women traditionally were not obligated to do it. So, for example, if I put if I just wear a blanket all the time outside, I would be committing a trespass if I didn't put tzitzit on it. If my wife were to wear it outside, she would not. She is patur, traditionally not obligated. Now, what if a woman wants to? What if a woman wants to wear a tallit? What if she wants to say the blessing for putting on the tallit? So there are three aspects to this. One, according to Sephardic authorities, if you're not directly obligated in the mitzvah, you cannot say the bracha. So even if a woman put on a tallit, she should not say the bracha. Ashkenazic tradition, which is what most of the synagogues here are, that stream, if you are not commanded, but you choose to do the mitzvah, you can say the bracha. And so in the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, which we will talk about later on, Yosef Karo says a woman can't put on tzitzit. Rabbi Moses Isserlis from Krakow, Poland, giving the Ashkenazic decision of law, says no. If a woman wants to, she can put on the tallit and say the blessing. But it's kind of haughty on her part. Kayohora, he says. Now, in the last 30 years, it keeps getting further back in my history. 60s, 70s, yeah, starting in the 70s, I guess. With the rise of various feminist movements throughout the world and various kinds of things, there became a push for women to wear a tallit in the synagogue. And a lot of conservative synagogues, especially in the States, women will wear a tallit in the synagogue. When they, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. It depends on the synagogue, the person, what have you, right? So that's the tallit. How many days a week do we wear the tallit?
Every day.
Every day. Now, in the also says in the Shema, you shall bind them as a sign upon your arm, and they shall be for totafot, some kind of bangle, symbol between your eyes. Now, the rabbis took that literally to mean that we have to have the words of the Shema, passage where the Shema is mentioned, as we're in a couple of places, the Shema and other sources that mention this idea. They're put on parchment, and there are two leather boxes which contain these scrolls. One for the arm and one for the head. Now, the one for the arm is all made out of leather that's pressed and dyed. I took the arm out first instead of the head. All right, we'll start with the arm. What did I say I was doing? I don't even remember anymore. All right, for the arm. For the arm, it's one compartment inside here. And so the parchment it's all in one roll of parchment. All the passages that are meant to be there. The Tefillin shel rosh, that for the head, is quite a bit different. This, and I'll pass it around, but please be careful with it. This has actually 4 compartments on top. They're pulled together. I will send out a video. I hope I still have it. That shows about making for the tefillin. It is, they use a heavy press to press this form. There are 4 compartments across the top. And each one of those 4 passages are on one scroll, and one is put into each chamber for the shel rosh. And now they also have leather straps so they can ukshartam liot. You shall bind them on your hands. So you have to bind them in some way. Traditionally, we put the tallit on first. In Jewish tradition, if you have two actions, one that is done more frequently than the other, the more frequent goes first. In Hebrew, we say tadir v'she'ino tadir, tadir kotan. That which is all the time and that which is not all the time, the one that is all the time goes first. That's why, all right. Thanks, my tummy over there. So if you're a righty, it goes on your left arm, your weaker arm. If you're a lefty, any lefties here? Okay. If you're a lefty, it goes on your right arm. Okay. Goes on your weaker arm. If you're ambidextrous, either by which hand do you usually write with, or which one you would throw a baseball with, depending upon your posek, to decide. So this is only done during the week. It's not worn on Shabbat or on the holiday, the major holidays. So that's why the tallit comes first and the tefillin come second. Okay? So it rests on your upper arm. It takes a long time to get used to doing it without cutting off your blood circulation and also without having them fall off, which is not always easy. And even today, I sometimes have issues. So it's wrapped 7 times around the lower arm. And then traditionally we roll it up here, get it out of the way. The tefillin shel rosh. They sit basically, gentlemen, where your hairline is or was. Okay. And you sit on top of the head like that. And then traditionally they're wrapped 3 times around the finger. Now this is the standard Ashkenazic version for a right-handed person. If you're left-handed, it's mirrored. If you're Chabadnik or Sephardi, it's rolled a little differently. The Sephardi version, I have to make do here to try and see. I was doing it right, rolling it in, and it's not tied to be able to be tied that way, but I'll pretend for a moment. Just wrap it out there, just to keep it up. So they do it this way, the 7 times. Yeah. Yeah. And they wrap it so that I can show you the roach is like this. On this would be a Chabadnik way, or sometimes do another one there. Most Hasidim do it that way. Real Sfardim, Yemenite Jews, for example, Jews from Morocco, have a fascinating way of doing it. I can't do it correctly, but it's something like this. It looks very mystical to me. I always get a kick out of it. All right.
Cool.
Huh?
Looks pretty cool.
It does. I didn't do it. You can Google it. So I'm going to pass these around, but please be very careful with them. The one on the arm has an extra cover cardboard so that it protects it. Traditionally, it doesn't have to be seen, so it has that. That's a rosh and go around. Now, one is the difference between tefillin and a tallit is that the tallit is clothing. You perform a mitzvah by putting tzitzit on it, but there's no sanctity to the tallit. It enables you to perform the mitzvah. Tefillin are different. Tefillin, they themselves have a level of sanctity because God's name is in them with parchment and all of that. And it's not a garment. You only wear it for the mitzvah. So one is supposed to be very careful not to do anything that would take away from that sanctity by wearing them. For example, and this is talks about in the Talmud, passing gas. One should be careful when wearing tefillin not to pass gas. We know that there was a custom at an early stage of history that Jewish men, or at least observant Jewish men, wore the tefillin all day long. You take them off when you went into the bathroom, and you put them back on. But that went by the wayside for many reasons. And so now it became the custom normally to wear them in the morning service, during the weekdays morning service. But all right, so now, again, it's done during the day, not at night, weekday, not on Shabbat. So it's what we call a mitzvah shezman grama. It's a mitzvah that is time dependent. So women, again, are patur, free from having to wear tefillin. Now, where the Ramah, Moses Isola, said that if a woman wants to wear tzitzit, she can. He wasn't happy with it, but she can do it. Says a woman cannot wear tefillin. And unfortunately, the reason he gives is because they're not careful about cleanliness. It may have to do with menses and things like that that we're bothered by. Again, with the onset of feminism and the push in that direction, there are those where women will wear tefillin. Thank you. So now, what about your head? Are you supposed to cover your head? That's an interesting question. We know that there's a discussion in the Talmudic literature about what a person can do in the synagogue bareheaded, or a man can do in the synagogue bareheaded. If it says you can do something bareheaded, I got it. In the synagogue, the implication is you weren't wearing a head covering in the synagogue. Because if you have to cover your head to open the ark, for example, well, if you had to be covering your head when you came into the synagogue, why is there a question? So we know from various sources that covering the head was seen as an act of piety. It was not originally considered to be obligatory. And there's some fascinating literature about it going through history. But by the early modern era, it was pretty standard, at least within the synagogue, or studying, or performing mitzvot, acts that men covered their head. Without making it too complicated, that was basically it. When the Reform movement began in the 19th century, part of their motivation, and it was a motivation to save Jews. I don't ever think it was a negative motivation. I don't think it ever was meant to be negative. They were trying to save Jews, and if you look in the church, men take their hats off when they come into church as a sign of respect. So we Jews too, we can emulate that. We'll wear the hats if you're out and it's cold. You can keep your head covered to keep it warm. But for ritual, you don't need to cover your head. And of course, in the Orthodox world, since the Reform said you don't have to cover your head, they became extra stringent, saying you had to cover your head. And indeed, when the conservative movement came into being, one of the strictures was that men had to wear a head covering in the synagogue. And today, you will see that the kippah, wearing some kind of kippah in the modern Orthodox world is fairly standard now, although before the Six-Day War in 1967, that was not necessarily the case. In the very Orthodox world, the Haredi world, men generally wear a hat outdoors. They wear a hat when praying and sometimes even studying, but then they can take their hat off to relax too. What about women? There it's a little, it would seem from the historical reality, most women covered their head or their hair. You look at, you think of the traditional garb of a nun, with the big ajib, as it were. You look at pictures of the Middle Ages, that's what women did, at least married women. That was considered to be modest dress. There is a statement in the Talmud that implies that a woman's hair is like her nakedness. It's distracting. So a man shouldn't pray in front of a woman with her head uncovered, with her hair showing. There were times in Jewish history when that was practiced more stringently, less stringently. There arose in some communities, Hasidic communities especially, that when a woman got married, she shaved her head and wore a wig or something like that afterwards. But even in non-Jewish circles, right, women wore a hat to church, right? That was considered to be the normal practice. So even if women didn't wear a wig, Jewish women wore a hat to shul. I mean, after all, if it's good for Sadie O'Hare, it's good for me. So, but then what happened? Women stopped wearing hats. So those Jewish women who weren't really concerned about covering their hair, they stopped wearing hats, or they put a little doily on their head when they came to the synagogue. My mother, blessed memory, that's what she used to do. Today, once again, you have, with the rise of feminism, an effort by women to not necessarily for modesty's sake, but the same thing. If a man wears a kippah in shul, a woman should wear a kippah in shul. But at least often they feminize the kippot they wear, similarly with the tallit. They sometimes feminize the tallit. That has never been a big issue. The big issue was not whether or not a woman could cover her hair, but what if she didn't? That was the issue in the Orthodox circles. And even today, you can go to modern Orthodox synagogues and you will see women with wigs. You'll see women with hats that basically cover just about everything and their hair. And you will find women with wearing a hat that is merely an excuse for calling it a hat, that is something on their head. All right. And I see that at the shul that I go to. Okay. So that goes every which way in terms of that. The last thing is how one is supposed to dress in the synagogue. Question of modesty, appropriate garb, used to not be a question. Right? When I was a kid, all the men wore a suit to shul, at least on Shabbos. All the women were decked out in the dress, and they wore a hat, the nice hat. And then all of that changed, and we talked a little bit about the issue about skirts and pants. Didn't we talked about that? Mm-hmm. Yeah, all right. To my fight, my shul. So in Orthodox synagogues, if you're going to an Orthodox synagogue, don't show up without wearing a skirt, ladies. and preferably one that at least is down to the knees. Yeah, not a little bit under. And in very Orthodox circles, a lot of the women will make sure they wear sleeves that cover even the elbows, and nothing low cut in front. Oops. And guys, as usual, it's a uneven requirement. Guys get away with murder. But especially on Shabbat, they should at least be wearing a nice jacket, nice jacket, if not a tie, when coming to shul. Now, we also have in the Shema, besides the Tefillin, we have Uchtavtam al mezuzot beitecha uvisharecha. You shall inscribe them on the doorposts of your homes and upon your gates. That is the concept of the Mezuzzah. Once again, the first two paragraphs of the Shema are written on a parchment, just like it's like a Torah scroll would be done. It is rolled up, and so that you roll it towards the beginning, from the back end to the beginning. And on the back of it is the word Shaddai, and also another. This is basically a Kabbalistic tradition. It has some other letters. And then that has to be attached to your doorpost. Most people put it inside a container of some kind. But the important thing is it's the parchment. That's the real mezuzah. The box outside is decorative, protective. There were some homes in which they would cut a notch into the actual doorpost, and the mezuzah could go right into there, and then end of the story. There's a famous argument as to which way should it be. Should the mezuzah be upright? Like you're going to read it, that's how you'd read it. Or should it be lying down? If you have a Torah, you put it down on the table to read from. So nobody could win the argument, so compromise. It's at a slant. So the tradition is it's supposed to be placed on the upper third of the doorpost. You've got kids, you can put it at the bottom of the upper third of the doorpost so they can get to it. Leaning into the room. So now notice it's into the room, because it's not just the front door. The understanding was mezuzot beitecha, all of the mezuzot of your home. If you have a room in your house that is at least about 4 or 5 by 4 or 5 feet, all right? And it's not a toilet. It's not a broom closet. It should have mezuzah on it. Our walk-in closet has a mezuzah on it. The door to my bedroom has a mezuzah on it. We have passageways which question whether they need a mezuzah or not. So some do have them, some don't. And the idea is the direction that you are going into the room is the way the mezuzah is supposed to be pointing. The front door, the top is towards the inside of the house. Your bedroom, it's going to be pointing towards inside your bedroom. Okay? Because that's the direction you're going. Your back door, pointing into the house. If you have a room that, say, your kitchen and your dining room, the doorway is which one is the more important room you point it towards. So the dining room is where you want to have your fancy guests. So it'd be pointed in towards the dining room. If you have a 12-room house, there probably should at least 12 mezuzot on the walls of the house. All right. And so as long as it is a space that is livable, it's not disreputable, it requires the presence of a mezuzah. All right. So I will do a little bit more about the prayer service probably next week. And I'm not sure what's on the calendar there. We'll look and see. But we will continue definitely with the Hebrew next week. Okay. So practice everything you've done the last few weeks, and everybody have a good, safe week. Okay. Good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you.